Betrayal isn't just a wound, it's a quiet thief that steals your peace, your dreams, your very sense of self. That night, I realized the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding in the dark, but the ones sleeping beside you, whispering promises they never intended to keep. I wasn't just there to catch a liar. I was there to reclaim the woman he thought he'd broken beyond repair. I never thought I'd design my own ambush, but there I was sitting in a pristine, downtown Seattle loft that my husband had purchased with our money. Just not for us. The leather sofa still had that new furniture smell. I traced my finger along the armrest, wondering how many overtime hours at the law firm had paid for this little love nest. 12 years of marriage, converted into square footage and designer fixtures. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd found the property documents 3 days earlier while searching for our tax returns, separate LLC payments from our joint investment account, and a hastily hidden key labeled storage closet that absolutely did not open any storage closet. The math wasn't complicated, so I did what any reasonable woman might do when discovering her husband's real estate infidelity. As I sat alone in that sterile apartment, the ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder with each passing second. My pulse pounded in my ears, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a stone. I thought about every night I'd spent waiting for him to come home, every lie I'd believed because I wanted to trust him. A dull ache settled in my stomach, a mix of humiliation, grief, and a burning fury I could barely contain. I imagined them walking through the door, laughing, completely unaware their illusion was about to shatter. The silence around me felt suffocating, amplifying every creak of the floor, every distant city noise outside the window. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to steady the shaking in my hands, knowing that tonight would define the rest of my life. I made myself at home in it before he could. I checked my watch. 7:42 p.m., according to his calendar. Eric had a late client dinner tonight. Funny how his client dinners had multiplied these past 8 months. Even funnier, how his cologne had changed. How he'd suddenly developed an interest in running, how his work calls now required privacy. I heard the elevator ding outside the loft door. 2 voices, one male, one female, approached laughing about something. I took a slow sip of the 18-year-old Macallan I'd found in the kitchen cabinet, his good stuff, the stuff he never brought home. Just wait till you see the view. Eric's voice carried through the door as a key slid into the lock worth every. The door swung open and the light from the hallway spilled in, silhouetting my husband and a woman I'd never seen before. Her hand was comfortably tucked into the crook of his arm, that familiar gesture I used to do before it disappeared from our marriage. "Evening, honey," I said, turning on the lamp beside me. "Welcome home, or should I say, welcome to your other home." The woman, petite, probably mid-20s, with the kind of effortless beauty that requires serious effort, froze in the doorway. Eric's face performed a remarkable transformation, from relaxed happiness to shock to poorly concealed panic in under 2 seconds. "Emily," he managed, his voice strangled. "What are you? How did you find the apartment you've been hiding from me for 6 months?" I stood up, refusing to remain seated like I was the visitor. "The better question is how you thought I wouldn't." "You used our investment account, Eric. Did you think I wouldn't get statements?" The woman stepped back slightly. "Eric, what's happening? Who is this?" I extended my hand with exaggerated politeness. "I'm Emily, the wife, the first property owner, you might say." "And you are?" "Rachel," she whispered, not taking my hand, her eyes darting between me and Eric like she was watching a tennis match where both players were aiming at her. "Rachel," I repeated. "Lovely to meet the reason my husband works so many late nights. Tell me, is the legal industry really that demanding? Or has he been lying about his profession too?" "Emily, this isn't—" Eric began. "What it looks like," I finished for him. "Funny, that's exactly what my mother said when she caught my father with his assistant. Family tradition, I suppose." I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Beautiful view, excellent lighting, open concept, all the things I mentioned wanting when we were house hunting last year. I turned back to face them. "Remember when you said we couldn't afford an upgrade, Eric? I guess what you meant was we couldn't afford an upgrade for me." Eric finally managed to push himself into action, gently guiding Rachel toward the door. "Maybe you should go," he murmured to her. "Oh no, please stay, I insisted. You're as much a part of this conversation as anyone. After all, you've been living in an apartment I partially paid for. Rachel's eyes widened. You're married? You told me you were divorced, and there it was, the plot twist I hadn't anticipated. I laughed then, a genuine burst of surprised amusement. Divorced? Well, that's news to me. I've been preparing meals, washing your clothes, and sharing your bed for 12 years with no interruption, or legal documentation suggesting otherwise. Eric's face flushed red. Emily, please, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. I supplied. I imagine not. No cheater schedules their own exposure party. I walked over to the kitchen island, where I'd laid out my evidence, bank statements, property documents, and photographs of text messages I'd recovered. I could feel the weight of every word hanging in the air, like sharp knives slicing through the fragile illusion he'd built. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to physically shatter the perfect surfaces of this apartment as completely as he had shattered my trust. But I held myself steady, clinging to the cold fury that gave me strength. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about every moment he'd let me suffer alone, every lie he'd fed me so easily, every stolen choice. I especially enjoyed this exchange, I said, pointing to a printed screenshot. The one where you told her I was emotionally unavailable since my father died, using my grief as your excuse. That was a special kind of cruelty, Eric. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Eric stood motionless, caught between his wife and his mistress, looking like a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. So I clapped my hands together with false brightness. Who wants a drink? We have a lot to discuss about real estate, shared assets, and exactly how much alimony the court tends to award when one spouse uses joint funds to purchase secret property for their affair. Rachel was the first to break the standoff. She grabbed her purse from where she had dropped it in shock. I can't believe this, she muttered, her voice wavering between anger and humiliation. 6 months, Eric. 6 months of I'm almost divorced and it's complicated. Rachel, wait. Eric reached for her arm, but she yanked it away. Don't touch me. She backed toward the door. You told me you were living with your brother while finalizing your divorce. You said your ex-wife was bitter and trying to take everything. I couldn't help but laugh. Ex-wife? Bitter? I made him breakfast this morning. Rachel looked at me, then really looked at me, woman to woman. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I did. Her shock seemed genuine. But you should probably go before you become a witness to a homicide. She nodded and slipped out, closing the door quietly behind her. And then there were two. Eric's shoulders slumped as he moved toward the liquor cabinet. I beat him to it, slamming it shut. No, you don't get to numb this. You're going to feel every second of it. Emily, please, we need to talk about this, reasonably. Reasonably. The word tasted sour in my mouth. Was it reasonable when you told me we couldn't afford fertility treatments last year because of market instability, while you were funneling money into this place? Was it reasonable when I put my career on hold so you could pursue your partnership? Was it reasonable when I stayed by your side through your mother's illness, your failed first startup, your depression? Eric flinched with each question. That's not fair. I was there for you too. Were you? Because I remember sitting alone at my father's funeral reception while you took an emergency work call that I now suspect wasn't about work at all. He had the decency to look away. 12 years, Eric, that's what I gave you. 12 years of cooking your favorite meals, remembering your colleagues' names, planning our future. My voice cracked, despite my determination to remain cold. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not even the affair. It's that you let me believe we were building something together, while you were constructing an exit strategy. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. No? Then what was it like? Enlighten me? He sank onto a bar stool, running his hands through his hair. I don't know what happened. We got comfortable, routine, and then Rachel came into the firm as a new paralegal. She was younger, more exciting, not grieving a dead father. I supplied, interested. He said quietly. She asked questions about me, seemed fascinated by my opinions. I know how pathetic that sounds. You're right, it does sound pathetic. I leaned against the counter because I've asked about your day every single day for 12 years. I've listened to your opinions on everything, from politics to pickle brands, but you stopped hearing me years ago. Each word felt like it was tearing open wounds I'd tried so hard to close. His casual confession of boredom cut deeper than I expected, confirming every silent fear I'd nursed in the dark. My mind flashed through countless evenings spent sitting alone on the couch, trying to convince myself that his distance was temporary, that if I just tried harder, loved him more, he'd come back to me. Instead, he'd been searching for excitement in someone else's arms while I was drowning in loneliness he didn't even see. "Didn't you?" Eric looked up, confusion crossing his face. "The week before I found these documents, I told you I was thinking about going back to school for my master's. You nodded and said, 'That's nice.' I shook my head. 2 nights later, you mentioned how great it was that I was content with my life." His silence confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't been listening. "When exactly did you start planning this? The apartment? The new life?" Eric shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't planning anything. It just happened. A $500,000 apartment doesn't just happen, Eric. Neither does creating an LLC to hide assets from your spouse." I was confused, unhappy, and instead of talking to me, your wife, your supposed best friend, you decided to invest in real estate with our money and lie to another woman about being divorced. I crossed my arms. "That requires multiple deliberate decisions, not confusion." He stood up suddenly, frustration breaking through his guilt. "What do you want me to say, Emily? That I'm a terrible person?" "Fine, I'm terrible. I made horrible choices. What I want is for you to stop acting like this was something that happened to you rather than something you did." The air between us felt electric, charged with 12 years of partnership dissolving into antagonism. "You weren't happy either," he said, his voice low. "Don't pretend you were. When was the last time you initiated sex or suggested we go out somewhere? You've been a ghost in our marriage for years." The accusation stung, partly because there was a grain of truth to it. I had withdrawn, especially after my father's death, but I'd been grieving, not cheating. "So your solution to my emotional absence was to screw someone else and buy her an apartment with our money?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Not, I don't know, suggesting counseling, having an honest conversation, showing an ounce of the commitment you promised in our vows?" Eric had no answer for that. "The truly insulting part is that you didn't even have the courage to end our marriage before starting a new one." I continued. "You wanted to keep me as a safety net while you tested out your shiny new life. Did you think I wouldn't notice when you finally decided to make the switch? Or was I supposed to just fade away when you were ready to discard me?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, the most cliched line in the cheater's handbook. "And yet here we are." I gestured around the apartment, the physical manifestation of how much you've hurt me. He reached for me then, a reflexive gesture from years of physical comfort. I stepped back. "Don't." My voice was ice. "You don't get to touch me ever again." Something shifted in his eyes, the realization perhaps that some lines once crossed could never be uncrossed. "What happens now?" he asked, and for the first time I heard genuine fear in his voice. I smiled then, not with warmth but with the cold certainty of someone who had already mapped out the destruction to come. Now we discuss the terms of your surrender." The next morning, I woke up in my bed alone. Eric had spent the night at his brother's after I'd informed him that if he returned home, I'd be calling the police to report him for theft. It wasn't strictly true that using joint funds constituted theft, but he didn't know that, and I enjoyed watching the panic flash across his face. I reached for my phone and sent a quick text to Sarah. "It's done. Meeting at 10. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just my best friend. She was also one of Seattle's most ruthless divorce attorneys. The executioner. They called her in legal circles, though never to her face. Of course, we'd met in college and remained close, even when my career took a backseat to Eric's ambitions. When she'd offered to take my case pro bono, I declined. I wanted to pay her full rate. This wasn't charity. This was war. My phone pinged with her response. "Office. Bring everything we discussed. Don't forget the business records." I smiled. The business records? Eric thought he was so clever, creating that LLC to purchase the apartment, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd used our home address as the mailing address. Every quarterly statement, every tax document had come straight to our house, directly into my hands since I managed our mail while he was working late. I showered and dressed. With purpose, choosing a cream pantsuit that projected both confidence and wronged innocence. The perfect courtroom look Sarah had advised, though we were months away from that stage. As I applied my makeup, I thought about the path that had led me here. After finding the property documents, I hadn't immediately confronted Eric. Instead, I'd done what I do best. Research. I'd spent 3 days investigating, building a comprehensive picture of his deception. First, I'd called in a favor from Connor, my college boyfriend, who now worked in banking. "Just curious if you could tell me about an LLC registered to this address," I'd said casually. Connor had always carried a torch for me, even attending our wedding with barely disguised regret. Within hours, he'd sent me everything: the LLC's formation date, 6 months ago, its purpose, real estate holding, and its funding sources, primarily our joint investment account. He'd also flagged unusual transfers, large sums moving from our joint account to Eric's personal account, then to the LLC. Next, I'd contacted the building management of the apartment, posing as Eric's assistant. "Mr. Warren asked me to verify some maintenance details for the new unit," I'd said confidently. They'd helpfully provided the complete history of the purchase, including the dates Eric had visited for showings, all conveniently aligned with his supposed legal conferences. I'd even hired a private investigator, Sarah's recommendation, who had photographed Eric and Rachel entering and leaving the apartment multiple times over 2 weeks. But my masterstroke had been something else entirely. 3 years ago, when we'd updated our estate plan, I'd insisted on a fidelity clause in our postnuptial agreement. Eric had laughed it off as unnecessary, but signed it anyway. "It's just boilerplate language," I'd said casually, though I'd paid our attorney extra to craft language specific to our situation. The clause was elegant in its simplicity. If either spouse engaged in extramarital affairs resulting in financial impropriety, like, say, purchasing real estate for a lover, the wronged spouse would receive 70% of all marital assets, plus sole ownership of our primary residence. Eric had completely forgotten about it. I hadn't. I checked my bag one final time. The postnuptial agreement, the LLC documents, the private investigator's photos, bank statements showing the diverted funds, and my personal favorite, a USB drive containing a video of Eric and Rachel entering the apartment, date stamped and clear as day. As I headed out, my phone rang. "Eric? What do you want?" I answered coldly. "Emily, please, can we talk about this? There has to be a way to work through." "Save it. For someone who still believes your lies," I cut him off. "I'm meeting with my attorney in 30 minutes to discuss divorce proceedings." "Attorney," his voice rose an octave. "Emily, don't you think that's premature? We should try counseling first, work through." "The time for counseling was before you bought a sex apartment with our retirement fund," I snapped. "And just so we're clear, I know about the money you've been siphoning from the firm too." That was a bluff, but his sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck gold. Mental note: have Sarah add professional financial impropriety to our investigation. That's not what that was for," he stammered. "Save it. For your deposition," I said, and hung up. As I drove to Sarah's office, I thought about the quiet preparations I'd made over the past year. Even before discovering the apartment, something in me had sensed the shift in our marriage. I'd opened my own bank account, started transferring small amounts of my personal income into it. Each transfer had felt like a tiny betrayal of the vows I still clung to, but I'd done it anyway, driven by a growing sense of dread I couldn't shake. Every late night alone, every unanswered call, every moment he'd dismissed my concerns had carved cracks into the foundation of my trust until it felt like I was living in a house built on sand. The realization that I was slowly preparing for a future without him had both terrified and liberated me, even before I found undeniable proof of his lies. I'd cataloged our valuables, documented our financial history, and most importantly, I'd reconnected with my professional network. 2 months ago, I'd interviewed for a position at the Seattle Art Museum's restoration department, my original field before I'd scaled back to support Eric's career. They'd offered me the job last week. I hadn't told Eric. It was my safety net, my guarantee of independence, regardless of how the divorce settled. Sarah was waiting in her corner office, looking every bit the legal predator in a charcoal suit and red-soled heels. You look surprisingly good for someone whose marriage just imploded, she observed, gesturing for me to sit. I've been preparing for this possibility longer than you think, I replied, unpacking my evidence onto her desk. Smart girl. Always knew you were the brains in that relationship. She picked up the postnuptial agreement and smiled appreciatively. Ah yes, our little insurance policy. Let's see if he remembers signing this. He doesn't, I confirmed. When I mentioned divorce last night, he started talking about splitting assets equally. Sarah laughed. How generous of him to offer you what the law would guarantee anyway. She examined the LLC documents next. Using joint funds without disclosure. Classic financial infidelity. Courts hate that. There's more, I said, sliding over my phone. Check the texts he sent me over the past 6 months. Every time he was working late at the office. His location data shows him at the apartment. You tracked his location? Sarah raised an eyebrow, impressed. Family sharing. He set it up years ago so I could see when he was heading home from work. I smiled thinly. Ironic, isn't it? For the next hour, we strategized. Sarah would file for divorce citing adultery and financial misconduct. We'd request an emergency hearing to freeze assets, particularly the LLC and apartment. Meanwhile, I would continue documenting everything and prepare to move forward with my new job. What about the house? Sarah asked. Do you want to stay there or sell? I considered the 4-bedroom home we'd purchased together, the garden I'd cultivated, the memories, both good and poisoned. I want to keep it, I decided. Not because I want to live there forever, but because I want him to drive past it and know it's not his anymore. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's my girl. Now one last thing, she leaned forward. He's going to try to reconcile. Men like Eric panic when they realize what they're about to lose. He'll promise to change, beg for another chance. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the late nights I'd spent waiting for him, the fertility treatments he'd denied us while funding his secret life, the years I'd invested in a partnership that had been slowly hollowing out from within. I was prepared to spend my life with him, I said quietly. Now, I'm prepared to spend it without him. There's no third option. Sarah reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. Then let's make sure you get every penny you deserve. As I left her office, my phone pinged with a text from Eric. Please come home, we need to talk. I can explain everything. I typed back a single response. I'm not the one who needs to find a new home. 3 weeks later, I stood in the kitchen of our home, my home now, according to the temporary court order, listening to Eric's increasingly desperate voicemail. Emily, please, the bank froze the firm's accounts. I can't access anything. My attorney says this postnup might not even be enforceable. We need to talk directly, work something out between us. I deleted the message and continued chopping vegetables for my dinner. Just one place setting now. The silence of the house no longer bothered me. It felt cleansing. Every footstep echoed through the empty rooms. Each familiar creak of the floor reminding me both of the life we'd built together and of how easily he dismantled it. But instead of crushing loneliness, I felt an unexpected peace in the solitude. I could hear my own thoughts again. For the first time in years, the walls weren't closing in with doubts about where he was or who he was with. The emptiness wasn't a punishment. It was a promise of freedom. The emergency hearing had gone exactly as Sarah predicted. When the judge saw the evidence of financial impropriety, not just the apartment, but also, as we discovered, nearly $200,000 Eric had diverted from his law firm into personal investments, he'd immediately granted our motion to freeze assets and awarded me temporary exclusive use of our primary residence. Eric had been ordered to continue paying the mortgage and utilities while maintaining his own separate housing. The look on his face when the judge announced the ruling had been worth every cent of Sarah's legal fees. His attorney, a country club friend who specialized in tax law, not family court, had been thoroughly outmatched by Sarah. They'd tried arguing that the postnuptial agreement was signed under duress. It wasn't, and that the apartment was a legitimate investment property. It clearly wasn't. My phone rang again, not Eric this time, but Rachel. I'd given her my number after our confrontation, sensing she might be almost as blindsided as I was. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Hello? Rachel? Emily. Her voice was tight. I thought you should know something. I'm listening. Eric came to see me yesterday. He said you were being unreasonable, that you were trying to destroy him out of spite. He wanted me to testify that there was nothing between us until after you two were separated. I laughed bitterly. Of course he did. And what did you say? I told him to go to hell. There was a new steel in her voice. I also told him I'm pregnant. The knife I was holding clattered to the counter. You're what? 11 weeks. I found out right after that night at the apartment. A raw, familiar ache twisted inside me, sharper than I'd felt in years, dragging me back to every doctor's visit where I'd hoped for a heartbeat that never came. Memories of endless blood tests, hormones, and sleepless nights spent searching forums for miracle cures resurfaced in an instant. The thought that he could give someone else so easily what we had tried so desperately for felt like the deepest cut of all. I wasn't going to tell him, but then he showed up asking me to lie for him, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. The room seemed to tilt slightly. After years of Eric telling me he wasn't ready for children, after the fertility discussions he'd constantly postponed. I'm sorry, Rachel continued. I know this must be painful to hear, but I thought you should know directly from me, not as a surprise in court. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do? I'm keeping the baby, she said firmly. And I'm filing for child support. I don't want him back. God, no. But this child deserves financial support from both parents. An unexpected laugh bubbled up from my chest. Well, you might want to get in line. There won't be much left after the divorce. There was a pause. Then Rachel asked, Would you be willing to meet in person? There's something else you should know. That's how I found myself sitting across from my husband's pregnant mistress at a quiet cafe the next afternoon. Rachel looked different, less polished, more human. Somehow, she pushed a manila envelope across the table. After Eric left my apartment, I started thinking about what else he might have lied about. So I did some digging. She nodded toward the envelope. Turns out, your husband has a pattern. Inside were printed emails, social media screenshots, and what appeared to be dating app conversations. All from Eric, all with different women spanning back nearly 5 years. It wasn't just me, Rachel said quietly. There were at least 4 others that I could find, most short-term, but there's one, Rebecca, who he's been seeing on and off for 3 years. She works at his firm as a paralegal too. I flipped through the evidence with surprisingly steady hands. Why are you giving me this? Rachel sipped her herbal tea. Because he tried to make me complicit in his lies. Because he told me you were cold and unloving, when I can see now that you're anything but. And because she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. I want my child to know I did the right thing, even when it was hard. I studied her face, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda, but found only exhausted sincerity. Thank you, I said finally. This will help. There's one more thing. She hesitated. Eric told me he's planning to claim the firm is failing, that he'll need to declare bankruptcy to avoid the settlement, but I've seen the books. The firm is doing better than ever. He's just hiding income. I smiled slowly. Now that is very interesting information. 2 days later, I sat in Sarah's office as she reviewed Rachel's evidence. This changes everything, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with predatory delight. Multiple affairs over years, not a one-time mistake. Financial fraud, planned perjury about the firm's value. She looked up at me. With this, we won't just win, Emily. We'll annihilate him. What's our next move? We request a forensic accountant to evaluate the firm. We depose these other women, and she smiled wickedly. We invite Rachel to our side of the courtroom. The following week brought the confrontation I'd been anticipating. Eric appeared on my doorstep unannounced, his normally impeccable appearance now rumpled and desperate. You have to stop this, Emily, he begged when I reluctantly opened the door. The firm can't survive a forensic audit. Everything I've built will collapse. I leaned against the door frame, blocking his entry. Shouldn't have built it on lies then. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but this vendetta will destroy both of us financially. His voice cracked. Don't you remember the good years? Don't 12 years of marriage mean anything? I studied the man I'd once planned to grow old with, searching for any remnant of the person I'd loved. They meant everything to me, Eric. That's why your betrayal can't be forgiven. Rachel's pregnant, he blurted out, watching for my reaction. I know, I said calmly. She told me herself right before she showed me evidence of your other affairs. The color drained from his face. What? Rebecca? Eliza? Sophia? Lauren? I recited the names like a litany. Did you think Rachel was special? The only one who mattered enough to tell me about? He staggered slightly. Emily, those were… Save it, I cut him off. Your deposition is next week. Under oath. Think carefully about whether you want to add perjury to your growing list of terrible life choices. Before he could respond, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah emerged, followed by a man carrying photography equipment. Perfect timing, I said brightly. The appraiser is here to document everything in the house for the asset division. You remember our wedding china? The art we collected? The furniture you insisted we needed? We're cataloging it all today. Eric watched helplessly as they approached. This isn't you, Emily. This cold, calculating person. This isn't who you are. I met his gaze steadily. You're right. It's who you made me. As Sarah and the appraiser reached the door, I stepped back. You should go now. Your life is falling apart, and I wouldn't want you to miss a second of watching it happen. He left without another word, shoulders slumped in defeat. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt no satisfaction in his pain, only a quiet certainty that justice was finally being served. 6 months later, I stood in the gallery of the Seattle Art Museum, supervising the installation of a newly restored Monet. My new position as assistant conservator had proven to be everything I'd hoped for, challenging, fulfilling, and completely mine. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier. In the end, Eric hadn't fought the terms. When faced with the mountain of evidence, the multiple affairs, the financial deceptions, the planned perjury about his firm's value, he'd folded completely. I received the house, which I promptly listed for sale, 75% of our marital assets, and ongoing alimony that would decrease gradually over 5 years. As I rebuilt my career, Eric kept his firm, though the forensic audit had revealed enough questionable financial maneuvers to warrant a separate IRS investigation. The downtown loft had been sold, the proceeds split according to the postnuptial agreement. I never set foot in it again after that first night. The memory of sitting in that leather chair, waiting for my life to implode and transform simultaneously, was enough. Even now, I sometimes found myself replaying that night in my mind. The cold stillness of the apartment, the rage and heartbreak that had battled for control inside me. But as I stood, surrounded by canvases older than my marriage, I felt how far I'd come. The hurt lingered like a faint bruise, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my days. Each stroke of the Monet reminded me I was capable of restoring not just art, but myself. Rachel had given birth to a daughter 2 months ago. We maintained a strange, cautious friendship, brought together by shared betrayal, and now linked through a child I occasionally saw in photos, but would likely never meet. Eric was minimally involved in his daughter's life, sending support payments but keeping emotional distance. Some patterns never change. My phone vibrated with a text from Sarah. Drinks tonight to celebrate? That British curator you mentioned will be at Gibson's. I smiled. Sarah had appointed herself my re-entry sponsor into single life, insisting that 38 was barely getting started and that I had years of hotness ahead after being wasted on that cheating lawyer. Maybe, I texted back. Busy with the installation here. I'll let you know. As I directed the lighting technician to adjust the angle illuminating the Monet, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to find Connor, my college boyfriend, now the banking executive who had helped me uncover Eric's financial deceptions, standing with his hands in his pockets. The rumors are true, he said, glancing at the painting. You did get the restoration job. 6 months now, I confirmed, surprised to see him. What brings you to the museum on a Thursday afternoon? Business lunch nearby, but truthfully, he smiled sheepishly. I heard through mutual friends that you were working here. Thought I'd see if you might want to grab coffee sometime. I studied him. The familiar crooked smile, the confidence that had always come naturally to him, the history between us that predated all the pain. Coffee, I repeated thoughtfully. Just coffee. For now. His eyes met mine directly. I heard about everything, Emily. I'm sorry for what you went through. Thank you. It was educational. I turned back to the painting. I learned what I'm capable of, and what I'll never tolerate again. That sounds like a woman who knows exactly what she wants. Connor observed. Getting there, I admitted. Some days I'm still finding my way. We stood in comfortable silence, gazing at the Monet, the way the water lilies seemed to float on the surface while concealing depths beneath. So, coffee? He prompted gently. Not yet, I decided. But maybe dinner next month, when I'm ready. He nodded, accepting the boundary without question. I'll be here when you are. No rush. After he left, I remained in the gallery, watching as visitors moved through the exhibit, each seeing something different in the same artwork. 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. 12 years mapped out in shared dreams and unified plans. Now each day was uncharted, constructed entirely by my own choices. That evening, as I declined Sarah's invitation and instead walked alone through Cary Park, I found myself stopping to watch a young couple arguing near the city overlook. The woman wiped away tears while the man gestured emphatically, his body language screaming defensiveness. For a moment, I saw myself and Eric in them. The early disagreements I'd smoothed over, the red flags I'd painted white through compromise and concession. I almost approached them, almost shared my hard-won wisdom about trusting instincts and maintaining boundaries. Instead, I continued walking, letting them find their own path, as I had finally found mine. Back in my new apartment, overlooking Puget Sound, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review conservation techniques for an upcoming project. As I worked, I realized I was smiling, not from happiness exactly, but from something deeper, the satisfaction of reclaimed autonomy. The apartment building's buzzer interrupted my concentration. The doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. Miss Reynolds, there's a delivery for you downstairs. I found a package with no return address. Inside was a small, exquisite glass paperweight containing what appeared to be a water lily, remarkably similar to the Monet I'd been restoring. A note accompanied it, to new beginnings. When you're ready, no rush, C. I placed the paperweight on my windowsill where the morning light would catch it. Not a commitment, not yet. Just a possibility to consider when the time was right. That night, as I stood on my balcony, watching the sound's shifting surface under the moonlight, I thought about the strange, painful journey that had led me here. The betrayal that had nearly broken me had instead forced me to rebuild myself stronger and wiser than before. I hadn't just survived Eric's betrayal, I had transcended it. The woman who had sat waiting in that apartment 6 months ago, heart pounding with betrayal and rage, was gone. In her place stood someone new, a woman who had learned that the most important vows aren't the ones we make to others, but the promises we make to ourselves. To new beginnings. Dear friend, sometimes life hands us heartbreaks so sharp they feel like they might cut us in half. But the Stoics remind us, what happens to us doesn't define us, how we respond does. When betrayal shatters your plans and leaves you alone in the ruins, know that you are never truly powerless. Every ending carries the seeds of a new beginning, and every wound holds a lesson that can make you stronger if you let it. You are not the sum of someone else's lies. You are the choices you make after the truth breaks free. To courage, to clarity, and to never settling for less than you deserve. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you stories that inspire and heal. Thank you for being here.